to start getting yourself seated so we can start our program shortly. We're conscious that it's been a long week for everyone, so hopefully we can have this discussion, we can have some food and maybe get some time to breathe before your next meeting. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Wui Nelson. I'm an advisor to the Permanent Mission of Tuvalu to the United Nations. Welcome you all to this space for this important discussion on leveraging lessons learned from the TPNW process for the future Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. Before we go into our run of show, just want to quickly announce some housekeeping. For the awareness of our participants, we do have a photographer in the room. If there are no objections, he will be allowed to take photos of everyone. Otherwise, we will restrict him to just the panelists. Do I see any objections? I see none. Thank you so much. He will also be asked to share the photos with all of us so that you can see your beautiful selves later. I would ask our colleagues who just entered the room to please sit at the table. Tama, yes. Okay, well, welcome all. Thank you so much for availing your time. We know it's been a long week, but we really appreciate both your presence and the space that you're offering to have this conversation. We also would like to make a special note to thank the Baha'i Center for giving us these wonderful rooms. We're very grateful. You know, it's so rare to have a meeting in New York where you have so much sunshine. So we are very grateful and we hope that you all take some time to soak it in. Outside of that, please, you will note that we have no microphones. So when you are speaking, please project your voice. We all want to hear your important inputs. Very briefly, I will walk us through a run of show and then I'll hand over to our magnificent panelists. So firstly, we will hear from the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Tuvalu, DPR Taniela Siose. Then we will hear from Sanlan William, Deputy Permanent Representative of Vanuatu. Then we will go to our wonderful friends at ICANN. We'll hear from Florian, Advocacy Officer. And we'll finish off with Mr. Timon Wallace, Executive Director of Warheads to Windmills. And then we'll take some questions and answers from the audience and do a short summary. Okay, well, let's get this show on the road. Please, DPR, can you open us up?
Thank you very much, Chima. Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. We are here today in the margin of the meeting of the state parties of the TPNW. And I know it's been a week long for all of you engaging in plenary sessions, special sessions, as well as side events, including this one. And we want to take this moment and applaud your perseverance. Many of you, including our colleagues from the Pacific, have come from far away and to share your experiences and your testimony on the impact of nuclear testing on our people and the Pacific family at large. So we see and appreciate your work. We also want to support your demand to move this beyond the narrative of pain and suffering, and for your stories to be the basis of relevant, effective, and informed policy changes to make the TPNW more than just an equitable instrument. Colleagues, while there is still work to be done, we acknowledge that the TPN is a landmark international agreement calling for a comprehensive ban on nuclear weapons adopted by 122 countries in 2017 and in force since January 2021. The TPNW stands as a testament to the global outcry against the catastrophic humanitarian and environmental consequences of these abhorrent weapons. By establishing a clear legal framework for nuclear disarmament, the TPNW advances our shared goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. And for the Pacific, we have demonstrated our commitment to a nuclear-free world through the Rarotonga Treaty, or what we call as the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty. For us, this is a significant agreement that promotes regional peace and security by reducing the risk of nuclear conflict in the Pacific. It bans nuclear testing and radioactive waste dumping, thus safeguarding our ecosystem and support the global non-proliferation efforts, aligning with international initiatives like the TPNW to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. I want to especially note that our friends, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, who signed the Rarotonga Treaty on Saturday, which is a great sign for the SEAT's leadership in this multilateralism. Thank you very much, Marshall Islands. Colleagues, but this is not all they are doing. The Marshall Islands also support the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, which is being led by my country, Tuvalu, and our colleagues from Vanuatu. This is an initiative is supported by 16 countries who are committed to a fossil fuel-free future. The International Energy Agency has reported that governments are planning to produce more than double the fossil fuels than what is consistent with the Paris Agreement goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So for us, the first step of no new expansion is crucial to limit global warming and mitigate the adverse effect of climate change. From the Marshall Islands in the north to Tuvalu in the south, the Pacific has always been a leader in multilateralism, pushing the boundaries for environmental protection and human rights, reflecting our unique perspectives and roles in global issues. Pacific Island nations actively promote climate action, sustainable development, and regional security. Our leadership is characterized by a commitment to multilateralism, inclusivity, and advocating for the voices of frontline communities. By addressing challenges such as climate change, maritime security, and economic resilience, we hope to influence international policy and foster a more just and sustainable world. We are currently working with our partners in government and civil society to increase the support for this important work. I will now yield the floor to my colleague from Vanuatu to speak more on the legal pathways of this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Falu, for that introduction. And before I say a few words, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this important conversation. To the organizers, thank you. Let me talk briefly about the value of Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, which was just mentioned by my colleague from Tuvalu, and the legal pathways that we are considering. So this is a critical undertaking, colleagues. Establishing a fossil fuel treaty, we stand at a pivotal moment, a time where this decisive action is not just recommended, but required. Our planet Earth and the well-being of generations to come depends on the choices we make today. The 2024 Global Stocktake confirms that the NDCs under the Paris Agreement will not meet the 1.5 degree goal. As Tuvalu mentioned, we have enough plant oil and gas extraction to blow past the 1.5 degree. And for our island nations, anything beyond 1.5 degree is a death sentence. The pathway before us, while challenging, is clear. We envision a treaty that binds nations together in a shared commitment to reduce fossil fuel production and use. A treaty that is not just an agreement, on paper, but a living testament to our collective will to change course. This journey towards a fossil fuel treaty can be broken down into 5 essential phases. One is to build movement that ignites the passion and dedication of people around the globe, creating an unstoppable force for change. Second is to secure a formal negotiating mandate that garners political will, which engages governments and laying the groundwork for formal discussions. Third is negotiating the treaty itself, which is a complex process, but crucial. And it's the work of crafting a document that balances ambition with practicality and participation with effectiveness. Fourth is the ratification of the treaty, which secures the commitment of nations and transforming words into action. Last, which is the fifth, is holding countries to accountability, which is the enforcement part and ensures that promises are kept and that commitments are honored, that the treaty is truly making a difference. So we are currently in phase 2, and as we progress, we need to consider the different pathways towards a legally binding framework. We must balance the ambition of our goals with the need for broad participation. We need to decide whether to pursue negotiations within the UN system or the United Nations framework, or through a standalone process, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. From within the United Nations, we have many good examples, such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Treaty, which is the BBNJ. From the UN system, we have the Plastics Treaty and the Convention on Biological Diversity. So we should not overlook the value of standalone processes. And it is fortunate that we have representatives from ICANN here, to my left, here today, who can share some of their experience with how TPNW came about. Our treaty must have it. It must include binding commitments to reduce fossil fuel production and use, and we must pay close attention to current developments in international law, such as the Inter-American Court for Human Rights advisory opinion, the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on climate change, and the plastic treaty negotiations that is currently going on. Let us embark on this journey together with determination, with hope, and with an unwavering commitment to a fossil-free future. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our country reps for setting the scene for a very important conversation. I think it goes without saying that we find ourselves in an uncertain world, in uncertain political times. And so it's important to draw from lessons of hope, because this is not the first time that the world has been in this situation. It's been here before. And I now call on Florian Eiblinkamp of the International Campaign for the Abolishment of Nuclear Weapons, ICANN, to tell us a little bit about the TPNW process and how that process could be leveraged in this current world. Before I hand over, I just also want to say that we are joined online by a large audience. So just to let everybody know that it's more than just the people in this room who are interested in this conversation. There are people around the world who want to be here but are unable. And so we opened up this meeting to them. Florian, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gemma, and thank you to Tuvalu and Vanuatu for hosting us, and of course to Tim for convening this panel. I'm so pleased to be here and to see this great turnout, despite it being the 5th day of the MSP and everyone is tired and a bit exhausted. But your presence speaks volumes in terms of how important this issue is and how interconnected our causes are. Maybe that's the first point I want to make, that beyond the meta level of treaty making, nuclear weapons and climate change are also connected issues. Many people call them the twin existential threats to humanity, as of course both have the the power to wipe out humanity. They are also human-made, and of course, both issues require very urgent action. Action also on a global level. As someone who works on nuclear weapons, we often talk about the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of a nuclear weapon, wiping out a city. But of course, climate change is similar in a way that it just destroys the livelihoods of entire populations, and including those who did not contribute to the problem. So there's a very profound moral and therefore also legal argument to make that that countries, whether they possess nuclear weapons or not, or whether they contribute to fossil fuel extraction or not, should have a say about how this is managed globally. There's unfortunately also the parallel that both issues for too long have lacked political leadership. That there's inertia, there's a very vested interests also in maintaining the status quo of high stockpiles of nuclear weapons, of high extraction rates of fossil fuels. And people like us, civil society, and especially also affected communities, have nevertheless shown that progress is very possible when these traditional power structures resist just such change. So I want to offer a few lessons from the TPNW process and from the origins. And I think maybe it resonates with many in the room that the TPNW grew out of a position of deep frustration over the status quo, that disarmament was simply not happening under existing treaties, that many of us went to the NPT conferences again and again, were told off that now is definitely not the time to talk about disarmament, and we need to wait for better times or similar destructions. And at some point, this proved to be a critical turning point where we try to shift the focus from this sort of very abstract security discussion to what I think is the much more realistic way to talk about nuclear weapons, namely the humanitarian and environmental consequences of nuclear weapons. So maybe that's the first lesson I could identify, is that first of all, we need to change the way we speak about the issue. Of course, a fossil fuel treaty could follow such a model, centering the human rights, the justice aspects, and of course the experience of the impacted communities in the center, rather than energy provision, economic interests, and so on. Needless to say, the TPNW would not be where it is now without the invaluable contributions by civil society, and particularly by those who suffered and continue to suffer from nuclear weapons explosions, be it in the countless nuclear weapons experiments, including in the Pacific, but also, of course, in those who survived the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's really their leadership and their guidance that brought the treaty into effect, and that continues to motivate the entire movement. Similar, I think, in climate change affected communities, there's such incredible leadership, including in civil society, and I think it goes without saying that these communities need to play a central role in a fossil fuel treaty as well to make it a success. Now, the TPNW was negotiated in 2017, entered into effect 2021, and now we're just one state party short of having a global majority under this treaty. What's missing, of course, now is the actual dismantling of nuclear weapons. But I think the great success of the TPNW so far is that it has really shifted the norm of what's acceptable behavior. It has really introduced new language. Nuclear weapons are no longer just abstract military tools that are sort of some passive deterrent, as some like to make us believe, but they're now in concrete legal terms backed by a majority of states, called weapons of indiscriminate mass destruction. So stigmatizing and delegitimizing this entire nuclear weapons industry is already taking place and making it harder to justify the continued existence of these weapons. Turning to a fossil fuel treaty, then I guess a similar proposal would be, in order that fossil fuels are no longer just accepted as an economic necessity or some sort of unchangeable fact of life, but that they are called out as a global threat that requires urgent accountability, phasing out, and then, of course, maybe also reparations or similar compensations and legal conclusions from that. Another area, I think, where the TPNW is making progress, including in states that have not signed the treaty yet, is the financial sector, where we see banks and pension funds and insurance companies divesting very actively from this industry. And many of them cite the TPNW as the primary reason to do so, because changing international norms will lead, or they are afraid that this will lead to law cases against them in the future. And maybe this is something, of course, also the fuel industry, the fossil fuel industry depends heavily on continued investments in this area. So creating a legal and a reputational risks for these investors, maybe a starting point for a campaign that can be done on the international level, but also very, very locally by each and everyone who has a bank account, right? Another lesson that the TPNW has, of course, shown to work is that there's no necessity to wait for each and every country to get on board before negotiating a treaty. There will always be countries who are very hesitant to this, who will outright block this, even before negotiations even take place. But in the TPNW, we try to portray those countries who are willing to do something as leaders in this field, and countries that, might not have a lot in common in terms of their usual geopolitical stances can come together on this one issue of nuclear weapons, because they feel this is something they should work on. And yeah, the TPNW is, of course, a prime example of progress being made against the very active resistance of the nuclear weapon states. Similarly, I could think in that oil-producing countries are very actively lobbying against such a treaty against fossil fuels. So don't let yourself be tamed by those, and rather seize the leadership that countries, including from the Pacific, can use on this, can exploit on this issue. I think maybe the last lesson to come to a close slowly is that also with the TPNW, we've created more of a sense of urgency, where other treaties are mainly concerned with the status quo, or particularly shaped in a way to benefit individual groups and small groups of states. Governments would often present nuclear disarmament as some sort of long-term goal, and some aspiration that's in the distant future, in a bit abstract terms, but basically would deny any urgency to the cause. And through the TPNW, a new treaty being negotiated, and the incredible civil society movement that was behind it, this urgency, of course, spread like a wildfire. There was media reports. There was, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize. There was incredible people speaking out in favor of this suddenly. And this, of course, does something to governments who are being held accountable. So yeah, I guess fossil fuels are similarly an issue where we repeatedly hear from politicians that now is not the time, even though we commit to a long-term goal of phasing out, or 1.5 degrees and so on. But what's really missing is this urgency. So I guess the fundamental lesson learned that I wanna bring across is that leadership combined with grassroots pressure, and of course a commitment to very fundamental aspects of international justice go a long way in international systems that are so complex as nuclear disarmament. And if we manage to start by changing the language about fossil fuels, we've gone a long way in terms of creating a norm that will inevitably also change the behavior of those countries currently resisting such a treaty. I think that's the fundamental lesson I've learned in the TPNW, that everyone can do something every state can be a champion of this. And the urgency is so great that we can no longer wait for each and every one to get on board before we start doing something. So thanks very much. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Gloria. And, that was a great summary. So you've done my job for me. I am grateful. You know, what you've said about leadership and prioritizing voices, that is a very important conversation that we are trying to have within the climate change space. Indigenous communities, coastal communities, small island developing states, we are at the front line of this crisis. And so having the input of these communities within the formation, like in this phase, is so important. And so in that vein, I would like to hand over to Timon Wallace, Executive Director of Warheads to Windmills, to kind of talk to us about the civil society and the voice of the unheard in these processes. Timon, please.
Okay, thank you, Gemma. And thanks to the other speakers and to all of the missions that are represented here. Thank you so much for coming, and to all of our other visitors. I'm here representing the Warheads to Windmills Coalition, and for those of you who don't know, it's a book called Warheads to Windmills, which is looking at both of these, what you called twin existential threats, and how they're linked up, and why we have to work on both of these issues. And we, as civil society, have been very involved in the TPNW negotiations and in the lobbying to get more countries on board and support the treaty. And we are looking forward to contributing to the same with the fossil fuel treaty as it develops. I wanted to just sort of reinforce some of the things that Florian said and add a bit more about going forward from here. In very specific terms, we have in the room now some of the countries that have played a leading role in the TPNW. And we're very, very grateful, especially for the contribution of the Pacific Island states, because as you were saying, you know, the voice of the communities that are affected by nuclear testing and nuclear waste and uranium mining, these are very much similar, if not identically the same communities that are affected also by the extraction of fossil fuels and the impacts on sea levels and so on. So, you know, those voices are incredibly important in changing the narrative, as Florian was talking about, on the nuclear weapons front, but also on the fossil fuel front. I mean, in some respects, the fossil fuel or the climate movement is much further along than the nuclear disarmament movement is in many ways, in terms of divestment, in terms of the number of organizations that are committed and working on these issues. I mean, we have in the ICANN movement 600 and something organizations in 100 countries or so. I know the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative has 2,000 or more. So, you know, there's so much to build on, but we also have things to contribute. And that the main purpose of this meeting was to look at how we that are involved in the TPNW can help and contribute to making this fossil fuel treaty a reality. And in terms of organizations, I identified 3 international networks that are supporting the ICANN and the TPNW, but I don't think are on board yet with the fossil fuel treaty. And so it's how do we work to build some of our colleagues to get them interested in this. Both of these initiatives are very strongly represented by the medical profession across the world. You know, medical professionals know the importance of eliminating nuclear weapons and addressing the fossil fuel issue. Same with faith communities and women's organizations and indigenous communities. You know, there's a core that is already active in both of these initiatives. The World Council of Churches has been a big supporter of the TPNW, and I don't think they're yet on with the fossil fuel non-proliferation initiative, but hopefully you'll get them on board. We can encourage them. The International Trade Union Congress, there's a whole network of trade unions and labor movements that could be mobilized for this. And the World Federation of United Nations Associations, which is another one, where we've worked alongside these groups with the TPNW, and I think we can easily get them to take on board in interest in the fossil fuel treaty. As I said, we're very grateful for the countries in the Pacific, especially that have been on the forefront of the TPNW. But there are other countries. Some of them are here today, like Ireland, South Africa, Costa Rica, Mexico, New Zealand, Philippines. These are countries that have taken a lead in the TPNW, and they may not all support the idea of a treaty phasing out fossil fuels, but they could at least be brought in to share some of the lessons and help think through some of the issues that you have to address to get a treaty set up like this. So we're very committed to working with those networks and organizations and country missions. One of the lessons which Florian didn't mention, which I think is a crucial one from the ICANN experience, is the idea that to build a treaty like this, you've got to work one diplomat at a time, one country at a time. We're building from scratch something. It took a long time. It took 10 years for ICANN to get to the point of negotiations. And that was just slowly building, talking to people, building support one by one, which we're also trying to do in the US Congress, as you can probably all imagine. It's going to take a long time to get 535 members of Congress on board. We got about 12 so far, but we started with nothing. So we're working one person at a time and seeing the results. And there's a critical mass that gets reached at some point where more and more people join the bandwagon. But Florian already and you both also talked about the links between the nuclear issue and the climate issue. And of course, the big one is that they're both threatening all of us. We can't deal with either of these issues without a treaty, because no one country can address these things. And as you said, the countries that are most affected may not even be the ones responsible for the carbon emissions or whatever. So we need to think how we build that collaboration and cooperation globally. And we're obviously not right now at the best moment in history for that kind of cooperation to be happening. We have to work our way through that and believe that it's possible that we can still build more cooperation globally and work through the United Nations and other structures to really strengthen international agreements and international law that will enable us to make these changes that have to happen. And I loved your unstoppable voice for change. I think you were talking about, the contribution that the rest of us can make in building movements. And as I said, the fossil fuel movement, there's enormous commitment to addressing the climate change threat that affects young people especially, but all of us. And we need to be able to build on that and translate it into focus on how do we make these treaties work. We all know that the Paris Agreement, well, first of all, it doesn't even mention fossil fuels, but second of all, it's not enough. It's not addressing the need. And so we need, and this was very, very similar with the nuclear issue. We had the non-proliferation treaty, the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, which some countries, including the one that we're in right now, seem to think, means that they can keep on having their nuclear weapons forever. And that's not what the treaty says. But, we were failing, as Florian said, the lack of progress in existing treaties is the impetus to get people to say, we got to do something more. And that's similar with the Paris Agreement on fossil fuels. So we're here to support you to figure out how we can work together to strengthen both of these treaties and make a world safe for our children.
Thank you so much. Before we move to the next section, I just want to give a big hand of applause to our Sometimes we wait until the end of the session to give a hand to the speakers, but I believe in giving people their flowers when we can. So thank you to all our speakers. Very powerful, very rich food for thought, which I hope we can all consume together in this next session. Questions and answers. You know, in hearing you all speak, it comes to mind that not only are we talking about the same affected communities in both spaces, in climate change and in nuclear, but we're also talking about the same landscape, the same power imbalances, those who are most affected and least responsible, those who have made the most economic gains from these issues, benefited the most, are the least willing to come to the table. So with that in mind, and with the wonderful interventions that we've heard, I open up to the floor. Let my friend Danity, who I met last night from Marshall Islands, said something really, really profound. We were discussing how Pacific Islanders are viewed in different forums, and we wanted to think about what is the balance between different interests. And she said, yeah, that's a good question. Let's grapple. And I think so often we shy away from difficult questions because we're afraid to grapple with the differences. I want to invite this room to really lean into to the discomfort and to the difficult questions, and to have that conversation, because if we don't have it, if nobody asks the questions, we will never have the conversation, and then we can never create answers which are meaningful and useful for us. So I open the floor. Let's grapple. And I see that a very Pacific way that we've left some seats open because we are shy. If you are going to ask a question from the back bench, I invite you to the front table. Yes, sir, please come to the front table.
Oh, no. It's not a question, it's an observation. That is, everybody here must always already be aware, we've already exceeded the 1.5 degrees Celsius global average rise in temperature in 2024. So we failed after 28 goes. We have another 129. Do we need 30, 31, 32, 33 to discuss these things? I think personally, I feel the time for discussion is over. But we need to work more closely together and not just stay in our little silos. That's why I find it wonderful. So many civic society groups have come together. We all have very similar aims and objectives, but we need to still work even closer together. One example of how this works effectively in the campaigning world is Avaz, which has 60 million members worldwide and can take up campaigns from any corner of the globe. I think we need to be thinking globally, acting locally, but supporting each other globally as well in order to achieve these noble aims that you have. I'm going to step back. No, somebody else can take the chair.
Thank you so much. The floor is open. Very much would like to hear from our friends and colleagues in the room. Even if it's just to say that you disagree with everything we said. That's also fine. Vanuatu, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I found it very, very interesting and intriguing. The lessons that were shared. I just out of interest, in terms of the numbers, I mean, I very much like what you said about, even if you have countries that are willing to lead in something, just sort of lead on and proceed. What was the experience in terms of the numbers as far as countries were concerned, and with sort of the tipping point by which you had a groundswell of, critical mass?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, at the end of the day, UN votes are a numbers game, right? Like, it's what, it's what the media will report. It's what also, what sways other states to do this. You don't want to be the only country to oppose this, or, we have a 2/3 majority, that's pretty cool, and so on. I think the lesson that we learned is that very many countries are actually supportive of this cause, but also very many of those were a bit shy in speaking out on this, where there were many good, maybe political reasons to keep quiet, to just not open another conflict with a nuclear weapon state or so. And it really took a few champions, I would say about 10 to 12 countries that would start speaking out on this, and including, of course, on like ministerial level, saying that this is not enough, and that there must be progress, and creating this sense of urgency. And then we saw more and more states being like, well, actually, my country would also be affected by a nuclear war, so why don't my country engage in this as well? And then, of course, it was so much work to get as many diplomats as possible in the room to press the right button at the right time, to adopt the treaty in 2017. And maybe many of you remember this fantastic scene of the nuclear weapon states press conference outside the UN Security Council room during the negotiations, where I think the nuclear weapon states and a few of their allies would line up and kind of try to deny the global community the right to speak on this, since they were used to being the only ones that would authoritatively speak on this. And in a way, that was such a wake-up call to, I think, to civil society, but of course to so many governments as well, that it looked ridiculous. There's these most powerful countries in the world, gigantic military arsenals, and yet they feel forced to hold this press conference to avoid what can't be avoided anymore, and this treaty being negotiated and adopted. So I think the nucleus of countries is actually very small. That sets things in motion, and then skilled campaigning, maybe very good diplomats, of course, also on the side of those states, woke up a lot of other countries that would have a very similar position, but just maybe never talked about it. Yeah. Now we do this every year in the first committee of the United Nations, that there's a resolution introduced that showing support for the TPNW, and the numbers change a little bit, but it's always around 130 to 140 countries supporting it. A few abstain, and then the nuclear weapon states and their closest allies oppose. But yeah, now it of course helps us a lot to say, well, the vast majority of countries is in favor of this, and it's really a small minority that clinches on to this outdated theory of deterrence. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, can you please also introduce the organization that you're speaking for?
Sure. My name is Lars Pohlmeier. I'm with IPPNW, International Physician for the Prevention of Nuclear War. I was one of the people in IPPNW who in 2006 raised their hands as a member of the international board to make ICANN an international campaign, which eventually led to the Nobel Peace Prize. So I've been with this from the very beginning. I just want to make maybe some comment. I think there was what made it possible to achieve this important treaty was also that there was a window of political opportunity, which was, as I see it, I don't know if you agree to that, the fact that Donald Trump got elected in 2016. And that might be an interesting idea because, again, in this political crisis we're right in, there's also a chance. The crisis provides us with a chance the United States government, we know that behind the scenes that the Obama administration was against this treaty, was trying to hinder any idea of negotiating such a treaty. And the fact that the Trump administration did not pay attention much to anything that was going on at the United Nations level, that in a way was, I think, that made it maybe possible or helped, at least help, to negotiate such a treaty. And in a way, we're in a similar situation again with the United States retreating from the Paris Agreement and certainly not making the United Nations center of their political interest. So that it might provide us with a chance to move forward with something that's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Here on the room. Tahiti, s'il vous plaît.
Warm greetings, Your Honor. My name is Tamatoa. I'm from Maupinui, French Polynesia. I'm a PhD student at the University of Hamburg, where I'm also part of the NGO Morui Tato, which is advocating for nuclear justice. My question, I have two reflective questions, actually. The first one is on the effectiveness of all the treaties that we are talking about, and in this context, the treaty of the fossil fuel treaty. And particularly when we consider when the non-proliferation treaty started in 1968, it concluded in the 60s, and now we are in 2025. And thanks to the TPNW, we have something more concrete, to deal with the nuclear consequences, nuclear impacts. So yes, particularly, what are the effectiveness of those treaties that we are highlighting? And in this context, the fossil fuel treaty, because we're gonna have the treaty for the fossil fuel, we're gonna have the treaty for the climate change, for the nuclear weapons, for the non-proliferation. Do we have a treaty for the deep sea mining? I don't know. But those are the impacts that our communities in the Pacific are deeply, impacting not only the people, but also the environment. And while in the meantime, people are finding strategies of adaptation and survival. So we're gonna have like a lot of discussions on how to implement the treaty, how to implement different discussions. It may take years, as we experienced, while on the other hand, we have people finding ways to adapt themselves and to survive. And my second question is, how can we get all those treaties on the impacts under the ban of human rights and environmental rights? How do we respect as indigenous people the environment? So meaning that the environment has rights as well. So how do we really consider those perspectives? Thank you.
Thank you, Tahiti, for your loaded questions. That's what we're here for. We're here to grapple. I may ask the online questions.
No online questions.
Excellent. Yes, madam.
I have a kind of a comment. Yes, sorry. My name is Katsumi Furitsu. I came from Japan, and I'm this time the representative of the Chernobyl Hibakusha Support Kansai. And I must say, it is a medical doctor and genetics and focusing on the transgenerational effect of radiation. But anyway, I'm very support that ideas of the fossil fuel treaty. I'm Japanese and came from such a country and emit so much the bad gas to the atmosphere and get climate up, so that we are very feeling guilty. But anyway, so that we have to make a pressure on our government and industry more. But at the same time, our government and many of other countries, including US, say that they say that they want to promote nuclear energy for saying to for the sake of the climate change, we know that it's right, but they say that they are using the climate change issue for the excuse, using the excuse and promote the nuclear energy. So I would say what do you think about the issue, the nuclear power plant, their policy of promoting nuclear power plants? We are against the nuclear power plants, but some countries and might say that it's okay that you sign on the treaty, but we will in turn promote nuclear energy. So of course the TPNW have such some problems. I think in the preamble they say that they support the right to promote the peaceful use of energy for the countries. So it's very contradictory things. So it is my comment and question to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much that's an important note around misinformation and disinformation that I think is something we do need to tackle. We'll take one more question online and then we'll have a go at answering that, shall we?
Yes, so I have a question on the chat from Sharon for you. Wondering what the most helpful action by US citizens would be to help support this effort. I know it's not a very friendly country for this kind of effort, but there's a lot of definitely citizens and civil society who support this effort. So if there's any comments on what the most effective way that they can help from here.
I share your question. I have the same question, so let's see if that-
So what I'll do is I'll just maybe distribute the questions a little bit. Florian, I'll hand you for Tahiti's first question around the effectiveness of treaties. And then perhaps Timon, as a US-based organization, perhaps you can advise what the best thing for US citizens to be doing in this difficult time is, and may also call upon our esteemed country representatives to have a little chat about perhaps how Pacific has built support from the multilateral system. And then I will also have a go at answering. I will exercise my moderator's privilege to do so. But please, Lauren, take it away.
Yeah, well, thanks for the great questions and comments. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about the TPNW's effectiveness, and in my work, I work a lot with the NATO countries, for example, and they feel, yeah, well, you have this treaty, but nuclear weapons are still here. So what did you really achieve? What I often try to respond then is that we can talk about the financial sector, divesting, and so on, as evidence of very tangible change that resulted from this treaty. But I think what we shouldn't underestimate also is that maybe two perspectives. One is that this treaty sets a new standard on how nuclear weapons are talked about. No longer only in a security space where former generals talk about how great nuclear weapons are and in quite graphic language boast about their might and so on. But there's a much more realistic discussion on what these weapons actually do and what they have done in the past, and a bit of, I would say, a more adult conversation on how to deal with them. And that creates a norm that nuclear weapons are unacceptable, no matter the circumstances. And following from such a norm, norms, of course, challenge behaviors and change behaviors. Of course, we would love to see the nuclear weapon states and their allies be more involved in this treaty, and regrettably, many of them have chosen not to engage at this conference. But we see advocacy efforts maybe at a level that's below the government. So we've got members of parliament speak out on this. We've got political parties making this part of their program. We've seen, of course, cities passing resolutions in support of this. All this groundswell of support, hasn't yet led to the United States or France or one of the other countries sign this treaty. But how can I say? Politics will change. The treaty is not going to change. It's going to stay with us. The nuclear weapons states are hiding from it for now, but they can't just simply ignore it forever. they will need to find a position to it, and all it takes maybe is one election and changing government to change their positions. I mean, we've seen crazier turnarounds of national positions than this. So yeah, that's the great value, I think, that changing the norm on what's acceptable and what's not is how effective the treaty has been and will be in the future.
What can US people do in the US? All of those things. As I said, we have to work one politician at a time. In Congress, it's an uphill battle. Most of them don't know now what the TPNW is. They certainly don't know what the fossil fuel treaty is. We have someone here working on that in Congress, and and we want to support them in educating politicians and the general public. I mean, people care about fossil fuels and climate, so it's about building that support for this idea that we need to work together internationally to solve this. And as Florian also mentioned, faith communities, colleges, cities, individuals can be looking at ways to divest, to boycott these companies, not just the nuclear weapons companies, but the fossil fuel companies. They're the ones that are blocking this. So we need to think about how we work together to put some pressure on them.
DPR, do you have any closing thoughts? Because I've also just noticed that we are running up to time, so I'll hand to you before I wrap.
Well, thank you. I think on the question of the effectiveness of the treaty with regards to the fossil fuel, why Tuvalu is taking seriously on this matter, that's because the science is clear. And sitting around this table are members of the Pacific Islands, and we are very small islands. But within our small islands, there are low-lying countries, atolls, we call them, and Kiribati, Tuvalu, with Marshall Islands. From the context of Tuvalu, we've lost some of our islands right before our very own eyes. And we all know that fossil fuel is attributable to this cause. And so fighting this cause, advocating for the fossil fuel treaty, it's crucial for Tuvalu to make sure that we, stay afloat and we don't get sink and submerged like scientists predicted that we'll be submerged in the next 50 years. And so we've learned from the testimonies from the TPNW, as to how we need to go about in partnership with international organizations. For example, you mentioned the World Church, Council Church, International Trade. And so this is what we're learning here today, and hopefully the FFNPTUs should emulate this in getting this into a successful undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you, DPR.
I do think we're living in a time where global challenges can't be fought by individual countries. So I think the way forward is through multilateralism, and that's dialogue and diplomacy, which means these conversations we must have, even if things are moving slowly, but surely one day we'll get there. Yes, thanks.
Thank you so much, colleagues. It's been a really important discussion. Thank you for bringing your views and your thoughts. One thing I did want to say was that, the strategy that we've employed as the FFNPT is to bring as many people on board and to prioritize the voices of the most affected communities. In the Pacific, we have a saying: to go far, you go alone. No, to go fast, you go alone. To go far, you go together. So that is probably the message which I would like all of you to take home, that we're not going fast, we are going far. And so we need everybody at the table. We need our partners in civil society from both the global north and the global south. and we need to prioritize the voices of the communities who are most affected by climate change and nuclear weapons use. All right, well, thank you so much for availing your time. You have half an hour before the next UN session. Please take some food and enjoy a little bit of sunshine. Thank you.
Thank you.